I first saw these, I go, wow, this looks like a rod.
There actually have been a lot of mythology and folklore over the ages that could seem to be tied into rods.
1896, Crawfordsville, Indiana.
The whole town witnessed what they called a sky monster. And they described it as being 30 feet long. It didn't have a head or tail, but it was withering through the sky much like a serpent or a fish. The whole town saw it in broad daylight.
Today I'd like to cast my wandering eye on a crypto myth well over 100 years old and was said to have taken place in the small town of Crawfordsville, Indiana. Now, if you Google this, you will probably come up with many postings on different sites, all basically telling the same chilly, frightening, and true story. It is as follows. It was cool the morning of September 5th, 1891. At around 2 a.m., two men hitching a wagon saw a horrible apparition appear in the sky. About 100 feet in the air hovered a bizarre creature, somewhat like a serpent, with no visible head. It was about 20 feet in length and had several pairs of wings. Reverend G.W. Schweitzer, a Methodist preacher, and his wife also saw the bizarre creature. It appeared again the following day in the evening. Hundreds of residents of Crawfordsville watched the creature as it flew about and squirmed as if in agony. It hovered at an altitude of about 300 feet and was heard to make a wheezing, plaintive sound. After the second appearance, the Crawfordsville Monster vanished, and it has not been seen since. The case has been investigated only by Charles Fort, who wrote of it in his book Lo, and Vincent H. Gaddis, who recounted the story in Mysterious Fires and Lights. The biggest problem in identifying the monster, in addition to its utterly bizarre appearance, is the fact that no one is really sure whether or not it is actually a cryptid or, as some claim, some sort of strange UFO display. The story was said to have been printed in the Indianapolis Journal of September 5th, reporting that it took place the day before, on the 4th. Two men saw it 100 feet in the air and described it as 20 feet long and 8 feet wide. It was headless and oblong. It seemed to propel itself with several fins while circling a house nearby. The two men were understandably scared and ran off, but the journal's story didn't stop there, reporting further that the following evening the creature returned. This time it was witnessed by hundreds of Crawfordsville citizens. It was reported that it was violently flapping its fins, squirming as if it was in pain, and made a high-pitched wheezing sound as it hovered in the air. Now, the only mention of witnesses' names in these accounts from the popular reports was that of the Reverend G.W. Schweitzer. It is also interesting to note that in Charles Fort's book Lo, the so-called investigation only led him to the report from the Indianapolis Journal, with the exception of confirmation that a Reverend G.W. Schweitzer actually did live in Crawfordsville in 1891. So what really did happen, if anything at all, in the wee morning hours of September 5th, 1891? Was there really a large sky monster flying around? Well, to find out, we need to go to the closest source to the incident possible to obtain the most accurate account. Fortunately, the Montgomery County Historical Society has already done the legwork for us in S. Chandler Leidy's report documenting it in April of 2008, and this report is easily accessible online. The original story was printed in the September 5th edition of the Crawfordsville Journal. In it, it gives the names of the original two witnesses as Bill Gray and Marshall McIntyre, who were ice delivery men for the town. The event happened just after 2 a.m., while the two men were preparing their wagon for the morning rounds. Now, the two men reported looking skyward and seeing a horrible apparition and feeling, quote, awe and dread, unquote. They described the creature as 18 feet long and 8 feet wide, moving quickly through the sky by the use of several pairs of side fins. It was pure white and had no defined shape or form, resembling somewhat a great white shroud. There was no tail or head visible, but there was one great flaming eye and had a wheezing, plaintive sound to it. It flapped like a flag in the wind, and it gave an occasional squirm as though it was suffering agony. The two watched it hover around for nearly an hour before retreating back into the barn. Shortly after midnight, Reverend Schweitzer had gone outside to take water from the well when he saw the creature. He woke his wife, and they watched the thing as it seemingly swam through the air like a huge serpent. Although these witnesses were ridiculed by many, there were those in town who believed the story. It was quickly picked up by the Indianapolis Journal, as well as other major newspapers in the country, including the Brooklyn Eagle. Mail poured into the town, inquiring about the creature, and some even suggested that the appearance of the monster meant the end of the world was at hand. The interesting thing is that the town of Crawfordsville had not one, but 4 newspapers, all of which vied for readers in an age before radio or TV. Sensationalism then, as now, is what could make the difference in circulation and sales. The only paper to publish this story was the Journal. The other 3 did not, and it was 3 days after the first publication that the final chapter to this frightening story was printed, again by the Journal. It seems that 2 other witnesses had been contacted, and they reported something far different than the other 4. Abe Hernley and John Hornbeck spotted the white mass moving about in the sky, and being the curious types, decided to follow it to see where it went. After a time, they finally managed to identify it as a flock of small birds. The several hundred killdeer, with their white underfeathers and screeching calls, were huddled together in a flying mass of confusion. The reason for the confusion was suggested by the Crawfordsville Journal to have been caused by the newly installed electric streetlights throughout the town. And what about the hundreds of witnesses that saw this creature during full daylight? Well, it never happened. It was never in the original article. Of course, you won't hear that part of the story from the likes of Monster Quest or their guest researcher Jose Escamilla, nor will you see it on most websites reporting cryptozoological events. The reason is the same now as it was over 100 years ago. Sensationalism sells.